Welcome to Speaker Night at the David Dunlap Observatory online with the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Toronto Centre. My name is Denise Chilton, and I am the RASC Toronto Centre DDO Committee Chair and an operator of the 74-inch telescope here at the David Dunlap Observatory. Together with our outreach coordinator, Quentin Wayrich, I'm really delighted to be your host for tonight's lecture. I'm also very excited to welcome you, our viewers, to tonight's lecture. If you haven't already, please do take a moment to say hello in the YouTube chat and tell us where you are joining us from. This helps us to make sure that all of our technology is working properly. The Royal Astronomical Society of Canada's mission is to enhance understanding of and inspire curiosity about the universe through public outreach, education, and support for astronomical research. In partnership with the City of Richmond Hill, RASC hosts outreach activities at the David Dunlap Observatory, or DDO. The observatory is home to Canada's largest optical telescope, which is this one right here behind me. We would like to start tonight by acknowledging that the David Dunlap Observatory here in Richmond Hill stands on the traditional territories of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, whose presence here continues to this day. We would also like to acknowledge this land is at the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and those of the First Nations of the Williams Treaty. We thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Maheen Hemani. Maheen has been fascinated with astronomy since she was very young. However, she found it was not very common for schools to teach much about the subject at the time. She attended several STEM programs in her home country of Pakistan to learn more about the field and get involved with observational amateur astronomy. By the time Maheen began her studies at York University in 2020, she had already performed some research in nuclear physics. However, it was only at York that she began to acquire proper experience with astronomical research, which involved determining solar rotation periods, classifying galaxies, and detecting exoplanets. She has worked at York University's Allan I Carswell Observatory for roughly 1 year, where she has learned how to operate the 1-meter telescope, and that is the largest on any Canadian university campus. She has also assisted in its ongoing research on variable stars. She expects to complete her degree in 2024. Tonight, Ms. Hemani's lecture is titled Astronomical Research at the Undergrad Level, and looks at the realities of what it's like to prepare for a career in astronomy. If you have questions for our speaker, please post them in the YouTube chat. Maheen will have time to take your questions at the end of her talk. Please join me now in welcoming Maheen Hemani.
Thank you for the amazing introduction, Denise. Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing well today. I am really excited to be here tonight to share my experience with astronomical research at the undergraduate level. As Denise mentioned, I am a third-year York University student. My major is physics and astronomy, and that is why I am giving a talk on astronomical research. So, my talk will mainly comprise of my experience with astronomical research during my undergraduate degree, and I hope that this helps anyone interested in astronomy or considering to pursue a degree in the future, or even if you're just curious. I hope you enjoy the talk. So, I'll start off with giving a bit of an outline of what I will be talking about today. I will start off with introducing a bit of the 1-meter telescope at the Allan I Carswell Observatory, since most of the research that I've done is from the 1-meter telescope. I will then move on to talk a little bit about the research projects that I've taken on during my undergraduate degree and I'm also currently doing. And lastly, I will talk a little bit about the research opportunities that you can have during your undergrad degree and what tools would you need for that. So, Let's get started with the talk. Here you can see the 1 meter telescope. This is a video taken of the 1 meter telescope rotating, and you can see it's pretty fast and has very strong motors. If you didn't know, Allan I Carswell Observatory actually also has a 60 centimeter and a 40 centimeter telescope. And if you're wondering, these numbers correspond to the diameter of the mirror of the telescopes. And as you can imagine and see on the screen, a 1 meter diameter mirror would require a very big telescopic body. And that is why the telescope is so huge. Although, even with its big size, it is very easy to move around with your hand, even though that isn't really required. It has two different cameras attached to it. So these are the cameras. One is the Maheen cam, and the other is the CCD, which is charged coupled devices. They serve two different purposes. Maheen cam is mostly used for live imaging during our live broadcasts, whereas CCD is more used for research observing. CCDs, or charged coupled devices, are sensitive detectors of photons that can be used in telescopes instead of photographic plates or films to produce images. They have a special way to store data and give us high quality and low noise images, which are essential in astronomy. I will not go into too much detail of the software that is used to operate the 1 meter telescope. However, it makes everything a lot more easier, whether it's being able to open the domes, point the telescope towards a target, and track the object during observations, which are all necessary steps towards a successful observing session, especially the tracking part. For anyone who's ever done any astronomical observing with a normal telescope that doesn't have tracking on it, you can probably understand the pain it is to having to track the object as Earth is obviously rotating and the position of the object is changing throughout the night. These are some of the softwares that are used when it comes to astronomical data processing. One of them is IRAF, which is one of the oldest softwares. It is the Image Reduction and Analysis Facility. It is useful in reduction and analysis of astronomical data. It has several packages, which you can probably see on the screen here. You can use these packages to perform different operations on your images and get a good data set. It also has this DS9, which is associated with it and is useful in displaying any images that you're working with. People also use Python and other programming languages for data processing in astronomy. So let's get into what we're all here for, research. As an undergraduate student in the astronomy stream, there are research projects embedded in the coursework. These projects involve getting familiar with observational methods as well as working with data. So using IRAF, Python, etc. for data processing, reduction, and analysis, as I just mentioned. The specific projects I've worked on and am currently working on include determining solar rotation periods, classification of galaxies, and exoplanet transit. One of the very first projects, which I very vividly remember because it was my first year project, was on solar rotation periods, specifically the sidereal rotation period. For anyone who doesn't know, there are two types of rotation periods. One of them is the sidereal rotation period, and the other is the synodic rotation period. The sidereal rotation period is the rotation period of a celestial body with reference to fixed stars. And the synodic rotation period is the rotation period of a celestial body with reference to the Earth. So since the Earth is also rotating, that comes into effect when you're calculating the rotation period of a celestial body. These differ, and we will see that. We will notice at the end of this, when I'll summarize the results of this, that the sidereal rotation period of the sun is actually shorter than the synodic rotation period of the sun. So moving on. This is actually an image that is directly from my report. So the way I measured the sidereal rotation period was by using sunspots as a reference. So the idea here is essentially to pick one sunspot and use it as a reference to see how the sun is rotating. Now, if you notice, the sunspot is at a different location every single day. That shows that rotation occurred. And now you can use this information to figure out the synodic rotation period. The reason that this is the synodic rotation period is because we're observing sun from the Earth. We can then use this synodic period that we calculated to figure out the sidereal period. The data I used for this was from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, SDO for short. I started off with taking the series of images from the website within a time frame of 7 days and used that to observe the sunspot I picked out as my reference. So obviously, the sun has a lot of sunspots on it, and we have to take one as a reference so that we know the movement, because if we're looking at all of the sunspot, it will be hard to figure out how it moved, right? Because they can look similar and they can have similar visibility. So once I did that, I picked out my reference, as I mentioned, and created a master image, which I can show you. Sorry. So this is the master image that I had made. Yeah, it was a little bit of extra work because we did not work with any softwares for this one and did everything by hand. So the reduction and calculations part, especially the reduction part, was actually done with geometrical methods. Calculations that I did for this specific project did not involve any programming at all, which is obviously very rare because at more advanced level, you definitely need programming for data reduction. Here, I mostly just used geometrical methods. As you can see, I've drawn different lines, chords, and stuff like that. The reduction part resulted in a measurement of angles, which are over here in this table, as they keep changing between the spots as the sun continues its rotation. Once I measured the angles between 10 different spots as they progress the 7-day period, I could easily figure out the synodic rotation period of the sun by dividing 360 degrees, because one rotation equals 360 degrees, with the angle calculation per day. The reason I did so many data points is obviously to avoid any uncertainty. And I cannot really avoid uncertainty, but I can reduce it to some level, and that helps with doing that in this way. Now, once I found out the synodic rotation period, I was able to calculate the sidereal period just by using the formula. And that is how I found the sidereal period of sun with the help of the synodic period and using geometrical methods. This was one of the first projects. I will then move on to one of the more advanced projects that I worked on. This is the galaxy classification project. It involved working with an assigned galaxy and was more advanced. As you all might know, there are 3 main types of galaxies: elliptical, spiral, and irregular. The galaxy that I specifically worked on is called NGC 864. It is an intermediate spiral galaxy in the constellation of Cetus. The purpose of this research was to investigate the galaxy's inner structure and determine if the galaxy has any active galactic nuclei. So as you can see on the screen, there's 2 images. One is of the NGC 864, which I've worked on, and one is of a different galaxy. It's named NGC 5728. And if you notice this nucleus on both of them, this one looks a lot more strong and brighter and luminous, whereas this one does not look as luminous. However, just by looking at the image, I cannot predict if it has an active galactic nucleus or not. And that's why it would require data analysis. Now, NGC 864 itself is an intermediate spiral galaxy. The purpose of this research was to investigate the galaxy's inner structure and determine if the galaxy has the active galactic nucleus, which I just talked about in these two images. These are understood to be, with AGN, it's actually a compact region at the center of a galaxy with a much higher than normal luminosity over at least some portion of the electromagnetic spectrum, with characteristics indicating that the luminosity is not produced by stars. So there's maybe something else in the center which is causing this extra luminosity. But what was understood recently is that it might be an active supermassive black holes at the center of the galaxies that are emitting jets and winds. Telescopes in space and on the ground detect these emissions of gases and dust as light all along the electromagnetic spectrum, from X-rays and visible light to infrared light and radio waves. All right. Next up, I have the part where I did the observations and data collection. The first part of this was to collect data with the 1-meter telescope, which we talked about before. Flat fields and biases are extremely important to attain good astronomical data. Flat fields are acquired by imaging a uniformly illuminated screen with which helps with producing an image of more uniform brightness and color across the frame. With the 1-meter telescope, the way we produce flat fields is by pointing our telescope at a flat region of the dome and illuminating it with a lamp. A bias, on the other hand, is an image taken with no light falling on the image sensor. So either you can cover the telescope or you can turn off all the lights and make sure it's dark. When collecting data, we don't only get one flat field or one bias, we collect a series of biases and flat fields for a good result of the final image. It is also important to ensure that the telescope is pointing in the right direction, which is pretty self-explanatory, and on the right target, which can be done by identifying a star from a galaxy and finding that star. When the desired position of the telescope was obtained, I then took a sample image with multiple exposure times with the CCD to obtain the desired results. So it is a little bit of a thing that you have to keep doing. So you try different exposure times. You start with less exposure time and you increase your exposure time, look at the counts and see what you're getting if it's desired, because the luminosity of every object will be different, and therefore the exposure time that you will require will also be different. While doing that, you also have to be careful about your instrumentation. You don't want to overexpose and damage the CCD. And that's why this takes a little bit of something that you have to keep doing till you get your desired results. So once I did obtain my desired results, I took a series of images of the galaxy NGC 864 for data processing. Next step was data reduction. So I performed my data reduction for this with the help of IRF, which I talked about, the Image Reduction and Analysis Facility. This involves normalizing the flat field images for flat field correction, which is necessary to get rid of any pixel-to-pixel variation in CCD sensitivity to light, alignment of the galaxy. So it was required for me to align all the galaxy images because even though you're taking the images at the same time, there can still be some alignment issues. And you need to make sure that when you're processing all the images together, they're aligned, right? You wouldn't want misalignment because then you will not get a good result. So for this step, I had to choose one of the images as a reference and then use that image to align all the other images to my reference image. The purpose of the alignment was to be able to combine the aligned images so that I could acquire an average image. Subtraction of light in the night sky was the last thing I did to ensure a more accurate measurement of the brightness of the galaxy. So we don't want any other sources of light, even though this will not give you the perfect results, but it can minimize uncertainty and it can give you a good enough data set. This, by the way, is directly from my report, and this is the galaxy, which is pointed by the arrow here. Okay, next is the measurement and analysis. So this was the part which involved median filtering and unsharp masking, which are actually just techniques to reveal galaxy structure and expose any nucleus if there is, since here we're trying to figure out the structure of the galaxy. So median filtering helps remove noise from signals and images. Unsharp masking is basically just the subtraction of the reduced image from the median filtered image that I had obtained. So all of the reduction steps led to giving me a good reduced image. I processed it. I used flat fields and biases to get a more uniform image. I got rid of the noise. This is actually, the median filtering is actually a great way to get rid of noise. And once you remove that, once you subtract that reduced image from the median filtered image, that is that's when you'll start to see progress. So once I measured the flux of the entire galaxy as well as the galaxy nucleus with the help of IRAF, I was able to calculate the magnitude difference between the galaxy and the galaxy nucleus. So since here we're trying to figure out if we have an AGN, an active galactic nucleus, we need to know if there is a difference in luminosity. We need to compare the luminosity difference in magnitude, keeping in mind that when we're saying we're measuring the luminosity of the galaxy, we're not saying without the nucleus. Once we're doing it with the nucleus, and once it's just only of the nucleus. The result that I had obtained was that the magnitude difference, which was approximately 3.25 with an uncertainty, it was not large enough to prove the existence of AGN in NGC 864. Lastly, one of the projects that I did, I didn't do it. I'm currently working on this one. So this basically is the exoplanet transit. It involves the detection of an exoplanet. Now, in general, there are many methods used for exoplanet detection. Some of them I'll tell, which are microlensing, radial velocity, direct observing. But the method that I will specifically be using is the transit method. So you can probably see this diagram on the screen. Transit method essentially is basically based on the idea that when an exoplanet passes in front of a reference star, a dip in the light curve of a star is observed, which helps detect an exoplanet. So here, when this exoplanet is passing in front of this really big star, right? And this is a light curve of the star, its brightness versus time. You can see that the brightness that we will observe, there is a dip in that brightness, which shows that some body passed in front of the star. This dip can be very useful in determining the diameter, size of the exoplanet by comparing how big the dip was. For that, you would need to know the information about the star that you're using as a reference, so that you know what the size of the star is and how much did the luminosity or the brightness reduce when the planet crossed the star? The specific exoplanet that I will be observing is mentioned here on the slide. It's this specific exoplanet. This is an image taken from the digitized sky survey. The pre-observing part of this project is actually a little more involved because you need to figure out when your exoplanet is transiting. You need to know the transit period. There are certain magnitudes which are more easier to work with. So you have to look at the sky survey and figure out if the exoplanet you want to observe is feasible on the night you want to observe, because sometimes even if the weather is clear and your transit period is like 5 hours, you never know when the sky decides to not be clear anymore, and that will affect your data collection. So that is something that I have to keep in mind before I go in to observe. And also sometimes we have cancellations of observing and things like that. So that is pretty common for anyone in astronomy to experience. It's a very good practice to prepare well in advance for anything like that. So lastly, I would talk a little bit about the research opportunities that are available. Now, I believe that research is a very important part of a scientific career, which it is. It is always a good idea to have the right tools for advanced research. Having prior experience with programming and understanding how data reduction and analysis work can increase your chances of getting more opportunities. However, if you don't, it's never too late to learn. The only thing you need is strong will. And wanting to learn things, right? Utilizing resources available during your degree, talking to professors, applying for research grants if you have the option to, and even starting individual research if you have an idea can be really helpful. If you have an idea and you think you could do research on it and you have limited resources, just planning something out and having a direction can really help you find people who might provide those resources for you. And even if you lack knowledge in the topic, you can always read and learn. You don't necessarily need a degree for everything you want to do research on. For example, even if I was not in astronomy and I wanted to do astronomical research, I could definitely do that by using the internet resources, trying to learn things, and actually get started on it. And you can create your own opportunities. And there's a lot of opportunities during undergrad that you will find, but nobody's going to come and tell you about those opportunities. You have to find them yourself. So having prior experience with programming and anything like that can really help. And that is it for my talk.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hemani, for sharing your insights into astronomy research at the undergraduate level and the kind of work that you are doing at York University. I imagine that this talk was especially helpful for all of the younger people in our audience who are applying for university programs or perhaps considering astronomy as a career path. We're going to check in now with our RASC DDO outreach coordinator, Quentin Wayrich, who has been monitoring the YouTube chat for questions from our viewers. Quentin, over to you.
Thanks so much, Denise. So Maheen, thank you for this talk. It's been an excellent presentation. We have a question from Eric Briggs, who asks, are the telescope and the camera working well, or do they have quirks? The older telescope at York has a real personality. I think we both kind of know the answer to this question, but go ahead and tell us your thoughts on that.
I mean, definitely, it's like working well. It's working great, especially the 1 meter telescope. It's just a dream of every undergrad student to work with it, to be honest. the 60 centimeters holding well. It's been here since 1967. The cameras, however, I was being told actually yesterday that the cameras on the 60, they have to keep replacing it, especially CCDs. They have to keep replacing it a lot. But the telescope is in great shape. It's working great. I hope that answers your question.
I hope so. I remember getting to work with the 1 meter telescope when I was at York University. It was a real treat. It's such a great machine. I think that is when you're working with sensitive equipment like a CCD or a big telescope. A lot of the time, it can be pretty finicky because it needs to be able to collect data that your average equipment isn't capable of. So the fact that the 60 centimeter telescope is still operational after all this time is really, really impressive. And the same can be said for our telescope here at the DDO, which is even older. We don't have any other questions from the chat that I'm seeing. If anybody has any, please feel free to ask. I did want to ask, though, Maheen, for the benefit of our younger audience members who may be considering going into astronomy as a career or as a field of study, what is it that you think that they should know about, and what is it that I guess surprised you as you were going into the field?
Yeah, so there were a lot of surprises, I would say, because I did not have that much astronomical experience. And the funny part is we actually had a high school teachers tour here at the observatory yesterday night. And they told me that even still, like, people start to learn about astronomy later during their high school. So like in ninth grade, which I think is very late because we start other sciences, or just physics way earlier. And so when I came to the field, I noticed that there's a lot of things that if I had done before, they would have helped me a lot. For example, being experienced with Python programming, knowing that I'm signing up for working with data analysis and things like that, the CCD, how it works, even just figuring out the coordinates in the sky. That's a lot of work, and just knowing that beforehand and reading up on that can really help with your degree.
Absolutely. Great answer. We have a question from Melissa Miles in the chat on behalf of Maya, who is 10 years old. She asks, would you ever want to go to space?
My 10-year-old self would be very excited, and that's what I would be thinking. I would love to go into space, but I don't think I could survive as an astronaut for a long time at the International Space Station. But yeah, I would love to go to space. I hope space tourism becomes a thing, and I can afford to go.
Absolutely. I think that everybody who is even like tangentially in the astronomical field, if they're really being honest with themselves, has fantasized about going to space at least once or twice.
Exactly.
We have a question from Paul Vermette, who asks, regarding image alignment, do you have to align images manually, or is it an automated process?
So the image alignment, there is a way of doing it. You can do it manually, but it is a part of the packages. There's an option known as ImAlign. It's a package that you can use in IRAF, and that helps with the image alignment. So thankfully, you don't really need to do it by hand.
Great answer. Thank you. One more question, just kind of a question of personal curiosity. Maheen, when you get your degree, do you know what you want to do with it? Do you have any particular plans for the future, or are you still trying to figure that out?
That's actually an interesting question, a very self-reflecting question. I definitely want to go into higher studies, so I don't want to just leave it, right? I want to do master's and get my PhD and stuff. But alongside that, I would love to do more research, publish papers, hopefully, do something like that. get more experience with astronomy and really enjoy, because I really enjoy working in this field. So yeah.
Absolutely. What advice do you have for students applying for astronomy programs or for parents whose children are considering this option?
Mm-hmm. So apart from the things that I have mentioned, is that since if you're not getting that much experience or not learning as much about astronomical subjects, it's good to well in advance get yourself familiar, even just watching like YouTube videos on topics, and being aware of what's currently going on with JWST or in astronomical research. The SpaceX is a great place to go, and Space News is a great place to get this information. Getting familiar with telescopes, maybe buying a small telescope, trying to observe with it, and things like that will really help you in your future. And apart from that, just enjoy the process. And if you're not familiar with things beforehand, don't be too hard on yourself. You'll eventually learn as far as you get involved when you start your degree. You'll be good.
Great answer. Yeah, I want to say, like, don't. I think that a lot of people who are interested in STEM fields in particular worry a lot about, like, have a lot of issues with like imposter syndrome, and a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm not qualified to do this
Exactly.
this work, and everybody feels that way. So you really shouldn't. You really should never tell yourself that you can't do it, because I can assure you, even the people who do it feel like they can't do it. I have a question in the chat from Andrew Smiley, who asks how and why you selected the star that you did to see the transit for the exoplanet.
So for the exoplanet, I actually had to base that off of my availability and my schedule, to be honest, because I'm obviously time bound, so I need something that is, not 5 hours. So I went on a date that I was available. There is an entire directory online, an exoplanet directory. If you just search exoplanet transit directory, you'll find a website where you can basically put in your latitude, longitude, all of your coordinates, and it will give you the time of transit, the magnitude of the exoplanet, like the transit, and it will also tell you the entire like time period, I believe so. And you can even plot a graph to see if it's actually suitable to observe, because you don't want moon to be very high up in the sky at that time, right? Because you don't want any background, too much of background luminosity affecting your data. So that's how I did it. I just went on the date that was available, and I found what was the most suitable, which is like an exoplanet with a magnitude less than 15, so that it's more easily detectable. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maheen. So I believe that concludes the questions from the chat. Thank you so much for bringing this perspective onto our program tonight, and have an excellent night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Quentin, for relaying those fantastic questions from our audience. And thank you again so much, Maheen, for answering them. You've given us some really fantastic insight into what it's like to study astronomy. And I really appreciate your encouragement to everyone to just go for it if they're interested. I will confess to our audience tonight, I'm actually an English teacher with a master's degree in English literature. And yet here I am trained as an operator of that great big 74-inch telescope behind me, mostly because I was interested too and thought it was really cool. And also, for the record, if anyone wants to send me to space, just sign me up. Now, this would not be a DDO online event without, of course, a tour of this facility. We have a pre-recorded video tour for you, recorded in the daytime, so the lighting is much better. We will come back after this video tour to take any questions the audience might have about the facility or its history.
Hello and welcome to the David Dunlap Observatory. Behind me is Canada's largest optical telescope. My name is Denise Chilton and I am a rascal, a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Toronto Centre. It is my pleasure to be an operator for this telescope, and tonight I'm going to give you an inside look at this telescope and how it works. But first, let's think about the history of this scope. This facility opened in 1935. Originally, it was a research telescope for the University of Toronto. It was named in memory of David Dunlap, who had thought that he was going to provide some funding for the construction of this scope. But his unfortunate death prior to that funding being secured put the future of the scope in jeopardy. It's very lucky that his widow, Jessie Dunlap, came forward to donate the funds for this facility. The telescope was built by Grubb Parsons in England, in Newcastle on Tyne, in 1932 and 1933. It was shipped across the Atlantic in pieces after being completely built and assembled and then disassembled in England. It was shipped here and rebuilt on this site, and it opened in 1935. It was in use as a research telescope for many years, but unfortunately, due to light pollution, and the availability of bigger and better research telescope facilities, the University of Toronto closed this telescope in 2008, and the property was eventually sold to the city of Richmond Hill. The good news is that the telescope is now open for public tours. Unfortunately, with COVID, we can't have people in the building, but tonight it will be my pleasure to show you how this telescope works. So how does a telescope work? Well, a telescope points outside at the night sky. Light flows down the optical tube, light from moon or stars or planets or dark sky objects, and it's collected by the great big mirror behind me. This is the primary mirror in the telescope. In this case, this one is 74 inches across, or 1.88 meters. You can probably see my reflection back there behind me, and it's this diameter that makes this telescope so powerful at collecting light and at being able to see very distant objects. When this facility opened in 1935, this became Canada's largest optical telescope, taking that record from the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory in Victoria, British Columbia. Their mirror is only 72 inches in diameter. Rumor has it that when You might have noticed that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. If you were to stay up all night, you might notice that all of the objects in the night sky do the same. The moon, the stars, the planets, and more. This is because the Earth is rotating. But what this means is that the telescope needs to be able to lock on to night sky objects and then track them across the sky as the Earth rotates. So we have some controls over here that allow us to lock onto our targets. Every object in the night sky has a set of coordinates. We call these coordinates right ascension for east to west and declination for north to south. These are the same as latitude and longitude coordinates for objects on Earth. Let me show you how our controllers work. This is our declination controller. It helps the telescope move north to south. Let's watch how that works. As the telescope is moving north, we can see the coordinates in the counterweight on the other side of the telescope, so we know exactly where it's pointed. Now that we have our declination coordinates locked in, north to south, we're going to lock in our right ascension coordinates, east to west. We use this wheel to do that. First, we unlock the telescope. And then we can turn the wheel, and our coordinate system is up here on the setting circle so that you can see where the telescope is pointing exactly. And we turn the wheel until it's pointing in the right direction. Once the telescope is pointed in the correct direction, we need to lock it in place again so that it doesn't swing around. But you might have noticed that the telescope is no longer pointing at the open sky. Instead, it's pointing at the inside of the dome. So we need to rotate the dome roof to bring the open window in front of the end of the telescope. The dome weighs 80 tons. It rotates on a set of 24 train wheels connected to a cable and pulley system powered by a motor downstairs. Once the open shutters are in position, we're ready to start observing the night sky. Just up this ladder, we can find our way to the eyepiece. I wonder what I'll see tonight. Thanks for joining us for this virtual tour of the David Dunlap Observatory. We hope to see you here in person as soon as we're able to reopen the facility for public tours. Until then, wishing you clear skies.
I hope you enjoyed that tour of the facility and that this glimpse inspires you to visit the DDO soon to learn more about the facility, the telescope, and the rich research history here. I am delighted to report that the David Dunlap Observatory has now fully reopened to the public and that we are looking forward to hosting some in-person events here very soon. If this tour is not enough to pique your interest in visiting the DDO, let's take a look now at a view through the 1.88 meter or 74-inch telescope here at the observatory. Coming up on your screen, you should have a pre-recorded view of Mars. Unfortunately, tonight, the weather here in Richmond Hill is not cooperating. It is rainy and cold, and as you might know, the telescope cannot see through the clouds. So we do have this pre-recorded view for you. Now, what you are seeing here is the planet Mars. This video was taken almost 2 years ago now, and it shows us some of the great features of Mars that we can see through the David Dunlap Observatory telescope. We can see the Syrtis Major Planum. That's the dark spike that is pointing to the 8 o'clock position on your screen. That dark color comes from exposed volcanic rock. Above the Syrtis Major Planum, there's a lighter area, that is the Hellas Basin. That's the largest recognizable impact basin, about 7,000 kilometers across, so extraordinarily big. At the 2 o'clock position, right on the limb or the edge of the planet there, you might be able to see that there's something that is slightly white. That is, in fact, the South Pole. Our telescope here at the DDO does flip images in the north-south axis, the vertical axis. So things that are at the top of the image are actually at the bottom of the planet if you were looking at it right side up. The light zone below Syrtis Major is the Arabia Terra. Now, you might, if you're a big fan of The Martian, you might remember that this is where Mark Watney gets stuck in a dust storm. Dust storms can go on the planet Mars for months. And a couple of years ago, we were really lucky to get clear skies on Mars right around the time of the opposition and closest approach to Earth. So we got those beautiful images. That short video was processed and enhanced a little bit by one of our RASC members, Claudio Oriani, and it's a little clearer than what we might normally see through the big scope in real time. That being said, we are hoping to get some great new views of Mars in the coming weeks as Mars is once again approaching opposition. I think that's right around the end of this month. So this is a perfect time to get out your backyard telescope if you're interested and take a look at the planet Mars. Let's head over now to our outreach coordinator, Quentin Rayrich, for any questions about the DDO facility, or the telescope itself. Quentin, what have people been asking in the YouTube chat?
Hi, Denise. There do not appear to be any questions from the chat right now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine then. We are happy to always entertain questions. You can certainly email us. Our email address is, I think, publicly available on our RASC website. I'll tell you where to find that in a moment. To end then, on behalf of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada Toronto Centre and the RASC DDO Committee, I'd like to once again give a big thank you to Maheen Hemani for sharing her amazing insights into her undergraduate research and what undergraduate research in astronomy looks like for people who are interested in trying that out. I'd also like to thank our technical support team, Andrew Reed and Betty Reed. And of course, I'd like to thank Quentin Rayrich for fielding questions from our YouTube audience. And of course, a special thank you to all of you, our viewers, for joining us this evening and for posting your great questions in the YouTube chat. This talk is part of our 2022 season of astronomy events here at the David Dunlap Observatory. They have mostly been online, but as I've mentioned, they will soon be back in person. These events are all offered through the partnership of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Toronto Centre, and the City of Richmond Hill. Our upcoming events include a Sunday sun-gazing event tomorrow. We hope to see some of you online for that tomorrow afternoon. Tickets for that event have already been sold, so unfortunately no new names can be added, but do stay tuned for the next Sunday sun-gazing, which will be on December 11th. We have an Up in the Sky event scheduled for December 2nd. Tickets are available for that. This is a virtual event where we ideally have clear skies and we get together a bunch of rascals with cameras attached to their telescopes, and we talk about the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, and we show our online guests live views through member telescopes, and if the weather is good here, even through the 74-inch telescope. So we live stream those views. It's a great time. We do have an in-person event scheduled for December 3rd. This is a Planetarium Days event. Our senior astronomer here at the DDO, Chris Vaughn, has an inflatable planetarium, and he brings it here to the site, sets that up, and has about 30 people in it to have a wonderful tour, interactive tour of the night sky projected on the inside of that planetarium. So it's a good time to be had by all. And finally, our next speakers night is December 10th. So we will be hopefully having a wonderful speaker like Maheen on again, and we will have time to take your questions once again for another professional astronomer. All of these events and more are posted on our website, rascto.ca. You can also find our contact information there if you want to get in touch. So please do have a look there for more details. We're very much hoping that tonight's event has you excited about trying astronomy for yourself. So to wrap up this evening, we do have some tips to help you. Please enjoy this video on getting started in astronomy, and wishing you a wonderful night and clear skies. A question we're often asked is, how do I get started in astronomy? It's a really great hobby, especially in this COVID context. It gets you outside for fresh air, you don't need to do it in a group, and there are tons of free resources online. So here's a quick guide to getting started in astronomy. Step 1 is to learn the sky. This really is essential, as it's important to be able to orient yourself and know what you're looking at. There are lots of resources to help you with this. If you prefer books, I can recommend Night Watch by Terence Dickinson or The Beginner's Observing Guide by Leo Enright. Or if you'd like to print out some star maps and star finders, there is the star finder from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. That's a printable star finder that you can take out with you under the night sky. Or you can print sky maps and sky atlases from skymaps.com. If you're a little more tech savvy and you prefer programs and apps, I recommend Stellarium. This is free planetarium software you can install on your home computer. Or Sky Safari. This is an excellent app for your phone. Once you've got your bearings, step 2 is to start observing. That's right, just head out under the night sky and look up. You don't need any special equipment, just your eyes. With your eyes, you can see things like constellations and asterisms. These are the formal and informal patterns that stars make in the night sky. You can see planets like Mars and several other planets as well. You can see the moon and observe its different phases as it moves across the sky. You can see meteor showers, comets, and even one galaxy that's bright enough to see with your naked eyes in a very dark sky area. Maybe you're inspired to look for more than what you can just see with your naked eyes. So step 3 is it's time to start collecting some gear. Now, you might be surprised that you may already have some of the things you need lying around the house. If you have a pair of binoculars, you can point those at the stars. If you don't, they're a small investment with a lot of benefits. With binoculars, you can see details like craters on the moon, or the phases of Venus and the moons of the planet Jupiter. You can even see smaller, fainter asterisms and double stars. Remember, one of our famous astronomers in history, Galileo, started out by using a telescope that didn't have much more magnifying power than an average pair of binoculars. His contributions to astronomy are remarkable, and you can see a lot through your binoculars too. If you're ready to get a little more serious about your astronomy hobby, you might consider investing in a telescope. A small amateur telescope is a big investment, but with more magnification possible, you can see more detail on the surface of planets, the moon's craters. You can see many double stars, some galaxies, and nebulas, and other deep sky objects. I recommend joining the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada to participate in the telescope loan program if you're interested in buying a telescope. You'll have an opportunity to try out many different scopes and determine which one is best for you. And this brings us to step 4, connect to a community. You can find information about the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Toronto Centre online at rascto.ca. And through RASC, you can learn about upcoming astronomy events, you can find more astronomy resources, and you can become a member of the club for additional benefits, like that telescope loan program I mentioned. I hope this guide has helped you to feel confident in getting started in astronomy. Enjoy those clear night skies.